Every woman has had, at least once, that silent, almost imperceptible feeling that something is wrong. It's a chill that runs down your spine when he says "I love you," but his eyes are elsewhere. When the hug is more lukewarm. When the apologies start to repeat themselves. This is a story about that. About betrayal in a relationship. About a partner's lies. About feigning love while living another life hidden away. A true story. Painful. Soul-wrenching. She believed him. He said he loved her with such certainty, with such tenderness, that any woman would have believed him. He promised a future, spoke of marriage, children, travel. And while he said all this, he spent nights with another woman. This story is about an ordinary woman, the kind who loves completely, who gives herself, who dreams, who believes, a woman who suffered in silence, who was betrayed by the one she trusted most. For the first few months, everything was perfect. He was attentive, kind, and affectionate. He made a point of showing everyone that she was the woman of his life. But the truth is, behind that charming smile, he hid a second life. A life made up of deleted messages, hidden dates, rejected calls, and perfumes that didn't belong to her. Little by little, she began to sense something wasn't right. It was a strange smell on the collar of his shirt, an untimely work meeting, a disappearance in the middle of the night with flimsy excuses. But even with all the signs, she tried to suppress that internal scream. Because he said he loved her, and she wanted to believe him. Because loving someone also means giving them the benefit of the doubt. But he knew how to manipulate. When she showed insecurity, he'd turn the tables. "You're acting very suspicious. You're imagining things where there aren't any." And she'd shrink. She'd start to think the problem was hers. That she was overreacting. That she was too insecure. That maybe she was just becoming paranoid. Time passed, and the cheerful, vibrant woman faded. She began to smile less, eat less, and sleep poorly. She suffered in silence. She didn't want to tell anyone how she felt. She was afraid of being judged, of hearing an "I told you so." She felt ashamed for distrusting the man everyone considered the perfect boyfriend. But the truth always finds a way to emerge, and it was on a cold morning, while he claimed to be solving a problem with a friend, that she decided to check. For the first time, she followed her instinct. His phone had vibrated. It was a notification, too quick to notice, but enough to leave a doubt. She lay awake, her heart racing, her head spinning. When he returned, he had a different perfume on his body. It wasn't hers. It wasn't any friend's. It was a woman's perfume. And the way he kissed her forehead, trying to disguise the smell, only confirmed it. He had been with someone else. In the following days, she began to observe everything more closely. Every word, every excuse, every absence. The confirmation came in pieces. A credit card bill for dinner for two. A forgotten email message. A motel note in the car's glove compartment. Small pieces of evidence that, together, formed a scream. He was cheating on me, and yet, he still said he loved her. He said it, looking her in the eyes, with that same sweet, firm tone he always used. He lied with conviction, with coldness, with the certainty of someone who believed he would never be found out. And now she was beginning to understand that the love she felt wasn't reciprocated. It was unrequited love. It was an illusion. But this story doesn't end there. Because, deep down, every woman has a limit. A point where love turns to pain, and pain turns to courage. And that's where she reached. In the coming chapters, you'll learn her name. You'll hear her story told through her voice. You'll experience every detail of what it's like to be betrayed by the one you loved. You'll learn who the other woman was, how everything was discovered, and what she did with this shocking revelation. This isn't just a story of emotional betrayal. It's a story of awakening, of the pain of betrayal, of broken trust, but also, perhaps, of a new beginning. And now, I want to ask you, have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever been suspicious of someone who claimed to love you? Comment below. Your story might touch someone else. Like the video if this narrative made you reflect, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear the rest of this real and intense story.
Hello, my name is Amanda. I'm 34 years old, a nurse, and until recently, I thought I was living the most beautiful love story of my life. Looking back, it pains me to realize it was just another story of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. I met Marcos at a New Year's Eve party at the hospital where I worked. He was friends with a doctor on staff, and he showed up almost by chance, and at first I didn't even notice him. But he noticed me, and he made sure to make that clear from the very first moment. He came up to me, complimented my laugh, my mannerisms, and at the end of the night, asked for my number. Over the next few days, he texted me every day. He was kind, funny, always interested in my day, my pain, my dreams. And I, already coming from a bad relationship, ended up falling in love with this man who seemed so different from anything I'd experienced before. For the first few months, Marcos was perfect. The kind who sends flowers at work, who cooks for you after a tiring shift, who listens to you even when you just want to vent. He was affectionate, helpful, present. He told me he loved me with an almost childlike frequency, as if he needed me to be assured of it all the time. And I believed. Of course I believed, because love, when it arrives like this, full of promises and attention, seems too real to be a lie. We started living together after a year of dating. It all happened so quickly, but he said, when it's meant to be, you feel it. And I wanted so badly to believe it was meant to be. For a while, everything was calm. He worked in sales and traveled a lot, but he always let me know where he was, or at least he said he did. And this is where I began to understand that the details were all there. I just didn't want to see them. I began to notice that he avoided letting me touch his phone. He always had an excuse, a new screen lock, a rush to turn it off when he was near me. When I asked, he'd say it was work-related, that he needed to maintain client confidentiality. And that's when my heart began to doubt. But my head did everything it could to find justifications. Because we don't want to believe we're being deceived. We want to trust, we want peace, we want to keep our dreams alive. But peace was slowly crumbling. He started coming home later. First, he said it was because of the traffic. Then he started saying he was having meetings at bars, at dinners with clients. He'd come home smelling of alcohol, cigarettes, and a feminine perfume that definitely wasn't mine. When I mentioned it, he'd say it was the waitress, the client's wife, the atmosphere. The excuse was always ready, and I always swallowed it dry. Not because I was stupid, but because I was afraid of being right. Afraid of what I would find if I persisted too much. There were nights when he would simply disappear. He'd say he was sleeping in a hotel because it was too late to return. He'd send me a random photo of a room, a quick selfie, and I'd pretend to believe him. Because the alternative was realizing I was alone. And there's no greater loneliness than being alone next to someone you love. I started to feel suffocated. I didn't want to tell my friends because I felt embarrassed. How could I, so careful, so rational, let myself be led by someone like that? I constantly blamed myself. I thought I was weak, stupid, blind. But the truth is, I just wanted to be loved, and he knew it. He knew exactly where to touch. When I walked away, he'd come back with gifts, sweet words, and caresses. He'd tell me he was being treated unfairly, that I was losing trust in him. Because of old traumas, and I, idiot, believed it. Until one night, he made a mistake. I can't explain what made me feel that morning would be different. Maybe it was an intuition, a feeling deep in my soul that kept me awake. Marcos said he had an important meeting, something that could determine his future at the company, and that he wouldn't be back until morning. I was used to these excuses, but that night something kept me awake, waiting. The silence in the house seemed to scream. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to every noise outside. Around 3 in the morning, my phone vibrated. It was a message he wasn't used to sending, a simple, "I'm here." I thought it was strange, since he usually only sent news when he got home or in the early evening. I grabbed his phone, which was lying forgotten on the couch. He'd left WhatsApp open. It was a fatal mistake. In the chat history, I saw her name, Juliana. Dozens of messages exchanged throughout the night appeared. Messages that weren't just about work. They were endearments, nicknames, plans to meet up. He said he missed her, but he couldn't wait to be with her. And there I was, reading, frozen, heartbroken. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt me. It was the way he lied, the way he hid everything, the way he said he loved me while talking to another woman late at night as if I didn't exist. That feeling of being deceived was worse than any slap. It was a wound that bled deeply. I spent hours unable to cry, unable to think straight. I tried to convince myself it might be some misunderstanding, that he'd have an explanation. But that certainty burned inside me. He was deceiving me. The next day, I confronted him. I asked him about the messages, the nights away from home, the lies. He tried to deny it at first, with that calm voice, that expression I knew so well, that I loved so much, but the evidence was there, irrefutable. He contradicted himself and finally confessed. What shocked me most wasn't the confession. It was the coldness with which he spoke, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to betray someone you claim to love. He said he was tired of the relationship, that he missed emotion, that he had met Juliana months ago and that she made him feel alive again. I felt destroyed, betrayed, deceived, rejected. It was as if everything I'd experienced with him had been an elaborate lie to deceive my feelings. And in the midst of that storm, my mind couldn't stop thinking, how can someone love and do so much harm at the same time? I pulled away. I needed space to breathe, to cry, to try to understand what was left of that love I thought was true. I cried so much that my skin was scarred. I locked myself in my room, avoided contact with friends, didn't want anyone to see me like this. I didn't want to appear weak, but I was completely shattered. At the same time, I felt a mixture of anger and guilt. Anger at him for deceiving me, for spending nights with another woman while I believed in his love. But guilt because even after everything, I missed him. Because the love he pretended to feel for me left deep scars, hard to erase. I found myself replaying every moment, every word, trying to find signs I'd overlooked. I wondered if I could have done something differently, if I'd been responsible for that betrayal. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. The victim is never to blame. For days, I remained in this cycle of pain, guilt, and anger, until a friend forced me to step outside, to try to look at myself beyond that dark cloud. That's when I began to understand that I needed to rediscover myself, to value myself again. That I deserved someone who respected me, who was honest, who truly loved me. Today, as I write this, I still feel the pain. But I also feel that, despite everything, I'm stronger. I've learned that love can't just be pretty words, that actions are worth more than empty promises, that trusting someone who doesn't deserve it is a costly mistake. In the next chapters, I'll tell you how I dealt with the shock of discovering not only the betrayal, but also the person he chose to betray me with, how I faced that woman, how I faced myself, and how I decided to move on, even with my heart in pieces. I want you to stay with me on this journey, because I know that many women go through this and need to know that they are not alone. I've always been the type of person who tries to understand before judging. Perhaps this cost me dearly. After discovering everything, the first thing that came to mind was, who is this woman? Who is this Juliana who stole nights and dreams from the man who claimed to love me? I needed to know. Not just to understand, but to face it all head on. The day after my discovery, I decided to investigate, not obsessively, but with that mixture of pain and curiosity that left me breathless. I searched Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn because, believe me, when you want to understand a betrayal, everything becomes a clue. She was the opposite of what I imagined. She wasn't one of those women who dresses provocatively or tries to attract attention at any cost. No, Juliana seemed like an ordinary woman, even a little reserved. Photos with friends, trips, posts about meditation and self-care. Nothing that explained how she could be where I should be. This normality hurt me because it showed me that the enemy was much closer than I thought. This wasn't some random stranger. This was someone I might pass on the street, someone who lived a seemingly normal life while destroying mine. I told a friend about it, and she said something that stuck with me. Sometimes the worst part isn't the other woman. It's the man who chooses to cheat and who lies to you. She was right. Because Juliana, at that moment, was just a pawn in the game. The real hurt came from the one I loved who chose to lie to me. Still, I decided to face Juliana. I wanted to hear from her, somehow, what she knew, what she felt. I needed to close that cycle, even if it meant opening an even bigger wound. Marcos had a habit of leaving his phone unlocked when he was home. A mistake he didn't make often, but it happened one afternoon when he went to work and I was alone. It was my chance. I sent Juliana a message. Something simple, direct, and straightforward. Who are you to him? The answer didn't take long to arrive. She was cold, almost arrogant. I'm the one he chose. If you don't like me, that's your problem. That cut me like a knife. The coldness in her response showed me that, for her, it was all just a game. She felt no guilt, no fear. Number. Feeling what I felt. It was a shock. Because at the time, I was feeling a whirlwind of emotions, guilt, pain, anger, sadness. And she seemed calm and passive, as if it were normal. I tried to respond, but I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to someone who's destroying your relationship that they're causing you pain? I couldn't. They didn't want to hear it. It was then that I realized I couldn't focus on her to heal myself. My fight was against what was inside me, against the pain of betrayal, against the feeling of inadequacy, against the guilt that consumed me. I started going to therapy. At first, reluctantly, because admitting I needed help felt like a sign of weakness. But it was there that I began to find answers. I began to understand that it wasn't my fault, that the love he pretended to feel was a lie. Each session was a struggle, but also a liberation. I talked about everything, about how I felt invisible, betrayed, deceived, about the sleepless nights, the thoughts that wouldn't leave me alone. Little by little, I found the strength to get back on my feet, but it wasn't easy. The feeling of loss was constant, and sometimes when I least expected it, a flash of that man smiling at me would come to haunt me. I asked myself, will I ever be able to trust again? Will I ever be able to love without fear? These questions stayed with me for a long time, until one day, I realized that the answer wasn't outside, but inside me. Rebuilding trust was one of the biggest battles I faced. I didn't know where to begin. The feeling of betrayal had left a huge void, a constant doubt that I would ever be able to trust anyone again. Trust, which had once felt so natural, was now a difficult wall to climb. The process was slow. Each day was a challenge. I had to learn to set limits, not only for others, but especially for myself. I stopped blaming myself for what happened. As much as my heart insisted on carrying that guilt, my mind needed to understand that I wasn't responsible for his choice. It was his decision to hurt me, and I couldn't carry that burden. I started focusing on myself. I went back to doing things I loved, even if it felt strange without him at first. I went out with friends, picked up hobbies I'd abandoned, and took care of my body and mind. It wasn't easy to face the mirror and recognize myself after everything, but it was necessary. Each small step was a victory, a brick in the road to rebuilding my self-esteem. I also had to learn to forgive not him because he didn't deserve it, but myself. Forgetting myself for believing someone who lied, for trusting too much. Forgiveness was liberating. It was as if by forgiving myself, I lifted a huge weight off my shoulders, a backpack full of hurt and disappointment. When I finally found the strength, I talked to Marcos. I told him in a firm voice I barely recognized that it wasn't going to work anymore, that I deserved respect and sincerity, that I no longer wanted to live in lies and doubt. He tried everything to convince me to state promises, tears, vows, to change, but I knew they were just more lies, that this story was already over. What ultimately saved me was understanding that self-love is what truly matters, that we don't need the approval of those who hurt us to be happy, to feel whole, that we deserve to be truly loved with respect and truth. Today, the scars still exist. They are marks that remain, reminders of what I experienced. But I no longer feel like a victim. I feel stronger, more whole, a survivor who chose to rise up despite the pain. And that's why I share my story, so that other women going through this know they're not alone, that there is a way out, that there is hope. If you're in this situation, I want you to know your pain is valid, your suffering is real, but you can break free. The first step is to put yourself first, to love yourself enough to say enough. After everything ended with Marcos, I thought I'd finally find some peace, that I'd be able to put an end to the pain and move on. But what I didn't expect was that the end of the relationship would be just the beginning of a much bigger struggle against memories, against insecurity, against the fear of never being able to trust anyone again. The house that was once ours, full of plans and laughter, became a cold and strange place. Every object, every corner, seemed to scream the memories I didn't want to have. Sometimes I'd sit in the living room and feel the emptiness swallow me. It was as if it were there, invisible, watching me, reminding me of what I'd lost. Those nights were the worst. My sleep became a torment. I kept reliving everything on a loop. The promises he made, the affectionate gestures that now seemed false, the sweet words that hid secrets. My mind became a prison where I was held hostage by thoughts that wouldn't let me escape. I wondered, in the silence of the early morning, if I would ever be able to free myself from that weight, if it would be possible to love again without fear, without distrusting everything. I wanted to protect myself. I wanted to close my heart so as not to suffer anymore. I wanted to disappear, to hide from the world and from what the future might bring. But deep down, something inside me refused to give up. Even with my chest tight, I knew I needed to find myself again, that I couldn't let that betrayal define who I was or who I would become. So, despite everything, I began to get up. Each day, even with the tears still fresh, I took a deep breath and took a step. It was painful, slow, but it was a step. I started taking care of myself again. I reclaimed the things I loved and had left behind. I reconnected with old friends, made small, simple plans just for me. And little by little, I learned to trust again, not in people, but in myself. I understood that true love begins within us, that we can only expect respect and affection from someone when we first respect and love ourselves. That trust cannot be given to others before giving it to ourselves. With my heart still scarred, I learned that I can love again, but in a different way. A love that doesn't depend on the approval or empty words of someone who couldn't be faithful. A love that strengthens and frees me. And it's this new story that I want to build. A story of overcoming, of strength, of courage to start over. But it wasn't just the rediscovery of myself that marked this phase of my life. After the relationship ended, consequences I couldn't even imagine arrived, that loneliness that isn't just physical, but invades every corner of my daily life. The curious looks from people, the questions no one quite knows how to ask, and the answers I myself couldn't give. When betrayal becomes public, even if only to those close to you, everything changes. At first, I avoided leaving the house. I felt ashamed, an invisible weight on my chest, as if I had a giant sign on my forehead that screamed, "She was betrayed." It hurt me deeply because it not only hurt me, but it also felt like I was being judged. As if I had done something wrong. As if I had failed. The friends I had became silent. Some didn't know what to say. Others told me to get over it, move on, as if it were something simple. But they didn't feel the open wound inside me. They didn't know how scared I was to trust again. It was at that moment that I realized I needed more support, a space where I could speak without fear or shame. So I started participating in groups of women who, like me, were suffering from betrayal. There, among those voices, I found comfort and hope, seeing that I wasn't alone, that other women felt the same pain, gave me strength. Every story, every shared tear was like an invisible hug telling me that I could keep going, that I could get back up. I learned that betrayal doesn't just destroy the heart, it shakes our identity, everything we thought we were. When someone we love chooses to lie and deceive us, we feel lost, as if everything we've built has lost its meaning. But I also learned that this crisis can be the beginning of a transformation, that we can choose to rise up, reinvent ourselves, and emerge stronger than ever. Today, even though I carry scars, I also carry stories of overcoming. Stories of women who, like me, decided that pain wouldn't be the end, but the beginning of a new life, a path of self-love and courage. With this certainty that I move forward, I know I deserve true love, a love without lies, without betrayal, without doubts. I know that one day I will find someone who loves me the way I deserve. What surprised me most about this whole story, and perhaps one of the most painful parts, was the reaction of those around me. I believed that by telling what had happened, I would receive support, understanding, and affection. I thought my friends and family would be my safe haven, my refuge. But the reality was quite different. Some remained silent, as if unsure of what to say, avoiding the subject with palpable discomfort. Others, with that distant look in their eyes, seemed to judge me, as if I had somehow contributed to the betrayal. And then there were those few who, without a second thought, made cruel comments, blaming me for not realizing it sooner, for being too trusting, for not taking better care of the relationship. It's amazing how betrayal not only destroys what exists between two people, but also shakes our entire support network, making us feel isolated, vulnerable, as if we were carrying a shameful secret. They asked if I'd done something to provoke them, if it wasn't time to take better care of myself, if I hadn't noticed the signs. Questions that seem innocent to the person asking them, but asterisk, cut deep for the person receiving them. Because in truth, the blame never lies with the victim. I carried this heavy guilt on my shoulders. For a while, I thought maybe it was true, that I had failed him somehow, that I wasn't good enough for him, that I had let the relationship fall into a rut and neglect. This guilt ate away at me, making me doubt myself and my worth. But it was in the midst of this internal storm that I began to seek real answers. Talking to people who had been through similar situations, to my therapist, to friends who listened to me without judgment, I began to understand that this wasn't my fault, that he alone was responsible for the lying, betrayal, and destruction. I understood that love isn't synonymous with blinding oneself to what's wrong, but that trust is an act of courage, and that the one who betrays loses trust, not the victim. That the pain of betrayal isn't a reflection of our own failure, but of the wrong choice of the one who promised us love and fidelity. I also learned that I can't let other people's blame or the judgmental looks I sometimes receive become my own. That carrying that weight would be unfair to myself, and that I deserve to live without that burden. It was a long and painful process. There were days when I wanted to give up, when sadness seemed to engulf me. But with each step, no matter how small, I grew stronger. The pain became fuel for my overcoming, for my transformation. Today, looking back, I see that I am much more than that betrayal, more than the lies and the sleepless nights. I am a woman, I am a warrior, I am someone who decided not to let herself be defined by pain, but to use it to reinvent herself. With this renewed strength, I continue trying to rebuild my story, my self-esteem, and my soul. Because in the end, true victory lies not in avoiding pain, but in rising from it. After that dark period, I realized that my greatest enemy was fear of giving myself over again, fear of trusting people, fear of opening my heart to someone who might hurt me again. It was an invisible fear that paralyzed me, that made me distrust even the simplest words, that led me to question every gesture, every look, every silence of the people around me. I spent hours and hours trying to figure out how to move forward, how to free myself from that shadow that seemed to follow me wherever I went. Sometimes I managed to distract myself, but my mind insisted on bringing me back to that night. Those messages, the lies, his coldness. It was as if my mind were stuck in an endless loop, reliving every detail, preventing me from breathing. That's when, little by little, I began to understand that I needed to reframe all of that I couldn't let that betrayal define my future, my choices, my way of loving. I needed to find a new path, a new way of looking at love, a love that begins within us, that doesn't depend on the presence or approval of another person to exist. I sought out activities that would help me reconnect with myself, giving myself the love and attention I so desperately needed. I started practicing yoga, meditating, and keeping a journal where I poured out all the emotions I couldn't express. Each practice, no matter how simple, represented a step toward reconnecting with myself, towards strengthening myself in the face of so much pain. I still feel moments of sadness, of course. I still have days when memories invade me without warning, and longing tightens my chest in a way that seems impossible to bear. But today, I know that these moments no longer dominate me. I've learned to face them, to embrace them without losing myself, because I've learned to take care of myself. One of the biggest lessons I learned from this whole story was the importance of self-love, that it's the fundamental foundation for any healthy relationship, that if I'm not whole, strong, and connected to myself, no external relationship will bring me real or lasting happiness. So, despite the scars I still carry, today I feel more alive than ever. I feel capable of loving again, but with open eyes, with self-respect, with renewed confidence. I know I deserve a love that values me, that respects me, and that has no room for lies or betrayal. And if I can leave one message for anyone going through similar pain, a betrayal that seems to crush their heart and soul, it's this: you are not alone. I know the pain is immense, that sometimes it seems impossible to carry on, but the strength within you is even greater. Don't be afraid to put yourself first, even if it means pushing away people who aren't good for you. Don't be ashamed to ask for help, to seek support, to talk about how you're feeling. And never, ever let betrayal, lies, or deception define who you are. You are so much more than this passing pain. You are light, you are courage, you are life pulsing within you, and it is this life that deserves to be lived fully with love, respect, and hope. So keep moving forward, even if it's one step at a time. Relearn to trust, reopen your heart, and know that the best is yet to come. After so much suffering, so many sleepless nights, I thought the worst was over. But the truth is, betrayal doesn't end when the relationship ends. It lingers like a shadow, a constant reminder of everything that was lost and everything that could have been different. That's when I began to realize that, despite the pain, I needed to look at Marcos not with hatred, but with understanding. Not to forgive the betrayal, but to understand what had led that man to choose another woman over me. I wanted to understand. If he was happy, if he felt guilty, if the guilt of what happened weighed on his chest as much as it did on mine. It was an almost obsessive need, because I needed to close that wound to truly move on. I began observing everything he did, the way he spoke, what he said when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I discovered that he was as lost as I was, that the Marcos I knew was, in fact, a man full of doubts and fears, a man who chose lies as a way to escape his own conflicts. But even in the face of this, I couldn't help but feel the anger. The anger that burned inside my chest, that made me want to scream, cry, disappear. It was a rage that wouldn't go away, that consumed me from the inside out. And then came the question that tortured me every night. Why did he do this to me? Why did he choose to betray me, to hurt me so deeply? I wanted an answer that made sense, that justified this immense pain, but I couldn't find one. I realized there are no easy answers for what he did. There is no excuse, no justification. There are only choices he made that forever changed my life. And it was at that moment that I understood that the real fight wasn't against him, but against my own pain. Against the feeling of betrayal, against the fear, against the doubt that haunted me day and night. I began searching for ways to channel this anger, this sadness, this pain that seemed endless. I did this by writing, crying, screaming alone in my room. It was my way of releasing everything I felt, of not letting it destroy me inside. And little by little, with great difficulty, I managed to transform that pain into strength. A strength that made me want to move forward, want to be better, want to be happy, even if it meant being alone. I still remember the day I looked in the mirror and said to myself, "You're going to get through this. You're going to be stronger than this pain." It was a turning point, a moment that changed everything. After that moment of looking in the mirror, something inside me began to change, though the pain was still raw, throbbing with every beat of my heart. That feeling of betrayal, the open wound that seemed unhealable, remained there, persistent, reminding me of what I'd lost. But for the first time in a long time, I decided I would no longer be a prisoner of that suffering. I decided I wouldn't let that pain define who I am or dictate the course of my life. I refused to be just a victim in that story. It was a long road full of dangerous curves. It wasn't a leap to happiness. It was one step at a time, with stumbles, tears, moments of fear, and also small victories. Some days, sadness pulled me down hard, making me want to hide from the world, lock myself away in a suffocating silence. Other times, I felt a flame of hope ignite, a lightness that pushed me forward, even if hesitantly. I allowed myself to feel everything I needed to feel. I didn't deny the anger that burned in my chest like fire. I didn't hide the deep sadness that tightened my chest and made me cry alone. I didn't reject the fear of opening myself up to the world again, of trusting again. Embracing those emotions helped me lessen their power over me. It was as if I were opening a window in that dark house, letting the wind in to refresh the heavy air. I gradually learned that forgiveness would be essential to my healing, but not forgiveness for him, because he didn't deserve it, but forgiveness for myself, so that I could finally free myself from the guilt I'd been carrying unjustly. Guilt for having believed, for having loved, for having trusted too much. It was a guilt I carried like a heavy backpack, preventing me from moving forward. Only when I was able to forgive myself did I feel I could begin to walk again with ease. In the process of rediscovering myself, I rediscovered parts of myself I had left behind. I found a strong, resilient woman, full of courage and with dreams beating in her heart. A woman who, despite being wounded, broke invisible chains to move forward, determined to rebuild her life and her self-esteem. And each small step I took was a silent cry of victory against the suffering that once tried to bring me down. Over time, I began to open up to life again. Little by little, I started going out again, meeting new people, and allowing myself to feel and love with a more careful and mature perspective. It was a process full of insecurities and doubts, because fear still insisted on appearing. But what changed was that I no longer let that fear dominate me. I faced it, talked to it, and told myself that I would no longer let it paralyze me. I learned that I deserve a different kind of love, a true love, one that respects, that doesn't hurt, that values every part of the other person. A love that has no room for lies, betrayal, or soul-destroying doubts. Today, even, though I carry the scars of this story, I feel ready to build a healthy love with trust and genuine affection. I know the road ahead is still long and full of challenges. The scars will remain as reminders of the battles I've already overcome, but I'm no longer afraid of them. Now, when I look at these marks, I see not just pain, but resilience, and strength. Each scar is a testament to my ability to survive and reinvent myself. Today, I'm no longer that woman who trusted blindly, who lost herself in love and forgot about herself. Today, I'm a whole woman who learned to love herself first, who respects herself and who takes care of herself with dedication. A woman who chose to put herself first, who knows her worth, and who doesn't accept less than she deserves. And it's with this woman that I move forward, with my heart open to whatever comes, but my eyes wide open too, prepared for any storm, for any joy, for everything the future holds, because I know my strength comes from within, and that strength is greater than any pain I ever tried to carry. After so many months trying to heal that seemingly endless wound, something unexpected happened. My reunion with him, Marcos. It wasn't planned, nor was it something I could have foreseen. It was as if fate had decided to test me once again, to place before me the chapter 1 thought I had already closed. It was an ordinary afternoon, the sky gray and the cold wind heralding rain. I walked the city streets, lost in my thoughts, trying not to think about him, trying to focus on myself, on my present, on my future. Then suddenly, there he was, across the street, standing, staring at me. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. My heart raced, my chest tightened, and a whirlwind of emotions washed over me all at once. Fear, anger, longing, confusion. It was a whirlwind I couldn't control. I wanted to run away, to disappear, but my feet felt rooted to the ground, as if hypnotized. He began to approach slowly, with that familiar look in his eyes, but this time it seemed filled with regret and pain. When he got close, he asked to talk, explaining that he needed to clarify everything, that the guilt weighed heavily on his conscience, that he wanted to apologize for everything he'd done, for all the suffering he'd caused. His words were low, full of sincerity, but also a fear of what I might feel, of what I might say. I wondered, is it possible to forgive someone who broke your heart into pieces? Is it worth opening the doors of your feelings to someone who's already caused so much damage? My mind screamed at me to protect myself, to walk away so I wouldn't get hurt again. But a part of me, more fragile and hopeful, wanted to listen. I wanted to understand. I wanted to perhaps find some meaning in this whole mess and this pain that seemed inexplicable. During our conversation, I realized we were both different from what we once were. Those wounds had changed us, shaped us in ways we never imagined. I can't say if that encounter was the definitive end of our story or just another painful chapter, but for me, it was a defining moment, an invitation to look at betrayal with new eyes, not only as a painful one, but also as an opportunity to learn and grow. In the days that followed, I couldn't get that conversation out of my head. I wrote in my journal every feeling that invaded me, every doubt, every fear, every desire to move forward, but also the insecurity of opening myself up to someone again. It was an internal turmoil, a back and forth between wanting and not being, able between hope and the fear of suffering more. And that's when I realized something fundamental. We don't need to forgive in order to forget, but to forgive in order to free ourselves, to stop carrying a weight that only destroys us so that hurt doesn't become a prison that prevents us from living. This process was painful. It shook me deeply, but it taught me a precious lesson that we have the power to choose what we take with us in this life, what will strengthen us, and what we must leave behind. Now, more than ever, I understand that forgiveness isn't a favor to someone else, but a gift we give ourselves. It's the key to opening the doors to emotional freedom, so we can move forward with ease, even if it's a lonely path. After that unexpected encounter, my mind was filled with a seemingly endless whirlwind of thoughts. I wondered incessantly if that moment was a sign for me to forgive, for me to give another chance, or if it was just a cruel test to revive a pain I'd already tried to bury. Every detail of that day is etched in my memory, the way he spoke, the hesitation in his words, the look of regret in his eyes, and even the heavy silence that settled between us. It was as if we were trying to rebuild something that had been destroyed brick by brick, but with the knowledge that perhaps that castle would never be the same. Deep down, I knew Marcos was no longer the man I loved. He bore the scars of his wrong choice, and I bore the scars left by that choice. Even so, the encounter affected me in a way I couldn't explain, mixing hope and fear, forgiveness and distrust. Over the next few nights, I found myself reliving old conversations, remembering the good and bad times, trying to find an answer that would bring me peace. I spent days trying to understand whether forgiveness was for him, for me, or for both. And I realized that true forgiveness is, above all, an act of self-love. I needed to free myself from the resentment, the hurt, the desire for revenge that only consumed me. I needed to forgive myself for putting myself in such a vulnerable situation, but I also needed to forgive him, not to take him back, but to release the weight I carried inside me. It was a painful process because forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or minimizing what happened. It means accepting that despite the pain, I choose to move forward without carrying that burden. That I choose peace, emotional freedom over resentment. Little by little, I began to feel a relief, a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. The pain didn't disappear, but it no longer held the same power over me. I was learning to live with the scars, to transform that pain into learning and strength. And it was through this transformation that I began to see myself differently, no longer as a victim, but as a survivor. A woman who faced the worst, who suffered, who cried, but who didn't let herself be defeated. Today, I can say I'm at peace with myself. There are still difficult days, of course, but they don't define my story. I choose who I want to be. I choose to love myself. I choose to be happy despite the past. This experience, cruel as it was, taught me that true love begins within. That to truly love someone, we must first love and respect ourselves deeply. And it is with this learning that I continue my journey, ready to embrace whatever comes, with an open heart, but with the wisdom that only pain can teach. Of course, I'll redo it block 1 of part 8 with much more depth, emotion, and detail to get very close to the 5,000 characters you requested. I reached a point where the pain of betrayal, though still present, was no longer the absolute center of my existence. That overwhelming feeling of loss began to give way to an even greater internal struggle, the fight for my own emotional freedom, the decision about my future, about the path I truly wanted to take from then on. For weeks, I plunged into a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, trying to understand what I truly wanted. I wrote pages in my journal, vented to people who listened patiently and lovingly, and tried to organize the mess that was my mind. The theory seemed simple. I needed to move on, free myself from that history marked by lies, rebuild my life without him. But the practice was a constant battle, a war between my heart that still suffered and my reason that screamed for justice. And self-love. I felt a deep longing aching in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just longing for the person, the man who once promised me love and security, but also longing for the dreams we'd built together, the plans we'd made, the life I'd imagined with him. It was as if I were mourning not only what was lost, but also what never happened, what remained in the void of unfulfilled promises. This longing paralyzed me at times, making me want to go back in time and change everything, making me doubt myself and my ability to be happy. But at the same time, an inner voice, both faint and firm, reminded me that I deserved so much more. But I deserved a love that was complete, sincere, that wouldn't leave me questioning my worth with every silence, every absence, every lie. I deserved someone who chose to be with me wholeheartedly, not someone divided, who needed to be in two places at once, who lived a double life while I remained in the darkness of doubt and pain. As clarity began to grow within me, illuminating my thoughts and giving me a strength I didn't even know I had. With this strength, I began to make a decision that, at first, seemed impossible. To go it alone, to rebuild my life on my own, without him, even if it meant facing the unknown, fear, and loneliness. But as time went on, I discovered that loneliness didn't have to be synonymous with sadness or failure. On the contrary, being alone can be an act of courage, a profound form of self-love, a journey of self-discovery and self-respect. Being alone gave me the right to breathe, to grow, to heal without rushing, to rediscover my essence, my dreams and desires without the constant shadow of betrayal. It was like this, step by step with ups and downs, that I began to free myself from the past, to loosen the ties that bound me to a painful history, and to open myself to the present, to the future, to everything that I could still build. There was still fear of what I would find alone, fear of not being able to cope, fear of getting lost again. But fear, which had once been an enemy, became a silent companion, a warning that taught me to be cautious, to protect myself. But without giving up on life, I learned to trust myself, to listen to my inner voice, to value my happiness above all else. And so the seemingly impossible new beginning became my greatest victory. Perfect. Here it is. Complete rework of block 2 of part 8 with more depth, emotion, description, and approximately 5,000 real characters as you requested. In the days that followed my decision to go it alone, I felt like I was learning to walk again, but without knowing exactly where my feet were. The first week was the hardest. The house was incredibly silent. Where there had once been voices, footsteps, and even arguments, there was now only the sound of the kitchen clock and my own heart trying to adjust to the absence. I began to rediscover solitude. Not the desperate, sad loneliness we feel when we're abandoned, but the loneliness that gives us space to breathe and think. I no longer woke up waiting for a good morning text, and that hurt, but at the same time, it freed me. I no longer had to check my phone for fear of what I might find. There were no more secrets hidden in deleted conversations or suspicious audio. Files, it was just me. And for the first time in a long time, that started to be enough. I started taking better care of myself. I started cooking for myself again, not because anyone expected dinner, but because I deserved to savor a meal made. With love, I tidied my room, throwing out clothes and mementos that only served to keep me trapped in the past. Each drawer I organized felt like a wound being cleaned. Going through his things, his old cards, his objects that once held meaning, it was painful, but necessary. I began to fill my time with new things. I started painting again. I bought paints, brushes, and canvases. And even without knowing what I was doing, I felt an immense peace just watching the colors spread before me. I went back to writing in my poetry notebook, which had been forgotten in the back of my closet. The pain inspired me, but now it was no longer a lament. It was a voice that finally wanted to be heard. I went out with friends I'd forgotten about because of him. I reconnected with people who reminded me of the woman I was before all this. Little by little, I felt life embrace me again. It invited me to smile, even if it was through teary eyes. I began to set boundaries more firmly. I realized how much I'd shrunk to fit into the space he gave me, how much I had silenced my intuition, ignored my feelings, and erased parts of myself for the sake of a relationship that, in the end, only existed for him when it was convenient. It wasn't easy to admit that I was wrong too, not for being betrayed, but for having put myself on the back burner for so long, for having given more love than I received, more understanding than he deserved, for having accepted crumbs as if they were emotional feasts. But there, in the silence of my new beginning, I understood that blaming myself wasn't the way forward, that I needed to transform that guilt into learning, that I wasn't stupid for believing him. I was human. I loved truly. And those who love truly never lose. Those who lose are those who didn't know how to value themselves. It was at this point that I began to feel a different strength rise within me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was a calm certainty. I don't want that for my life anymore. I deserve more. And even if I still cry from time to time, even if the memory insists on knocking on the door in the middle of the night, it was a risk going back there. I knew when I heard two women talking at the next table. At first, I didn't pay attention until one of them mentioned his name and her name, the other one. I didn't want to hear, but I couldn't help but listen. It was as if the universe was laughing at my attempt at reconstruction. They spoke naturally, as if telling a romantic tale. They're really together now, right? She even quit her job to live with him. He seems more in love than ever. At that moment, something inside me sank. I couldn't breathe properly. It was as if all the effort I'd put in up until that point was nullified by those few loose sentences. I felt my heart race, my palms sweat, and an old pain resurface with full force. I ran home without saying a word, without looking around. I closed the door, leaned my back against it, and cried like I hadn't cried in weeks. I cried with rage, with humiliation, with helplessness. I cried because, even after everything, it still hurt to see him moving on as if nothing had happened. And what's more, now he seemed to be living the perfect life with the woman who had destroyed mine. The days after that were difficult. I felt myself regressing emotionally, questioning everything again. Was the problem with me? Was I not enough? Why could he carry on as if nothing had happened while I struggled to pick up the pieces? But unlike before, this time I didn't stay long in this dark place. I'd been through this hell before, and this time I knew where the exit was. I started writing down everything I felt that day. I put my pain, my anger, my desire to scream on paper, and then I read it out loud to myself. It was as if I was listening to myself attentively for the first time. as if I was saying to myself, I understand you, I accept you, I'm here for you. This new relapse didn't destroy me, it strengthened me. It showed me that even if the past still tried to pull me back, I already had tools to protect myself. I was no longer that desperate woman blinded by pain. I was someone under construction, but more aware, more lucid, more firm in who I wanted to be. And there, in that moment of weakness turned into strength, I realized one of life's hardest truths. Those who hurt us don't always pay for what they did. Justice doesn't always come as we imagine. Sometimes life goes on and we need to learn to move on too for ourselves. Perfect. Here's the block 2 of part 9. With approximately 5,000 characters, maintaining the emotional and narrative continuity of the story. In the days following that trigger in the cafe, something inside me reorganized. I couldn't change the fact that he'd moved on, or that he was now with her, living the perfect life he'd perhaps always wanted. But I could and needed to decide what to do with the part of me that still ached. And that's when I realized something cruel, yet liberating. He didn't love me. Not the way I deserved. Maybe he had affection, attachment, even a kind of fondness. But love, the kind of love that cares, chooses, and respects, no. Those who love don't betray. Those who love don't deceive, don't lie, don't live a parallel life while holding your hand with false promises. It was hard to accept. It hurts to realize that the person you completely destroyed yourself for didn't see you with the same depth. That you gave everything to someone who, in the end, just took what they wanted and left when it was no longer convenient. But recognizing this made me realize the depth of the woman I am and how much more I deserve. I started repeating to myself in front of the mirror every day, you are not disposable, you are not replaceable. You are whole, strong, worthy of true love. At first I said it with a broken voice, disbelieving every word, but little by little it began to make sense, as if by repeating it, my heart was accepting that, yes, I could be happy again. And better yet, that I didn't need him for that. Life began to take on color again. It wasn't an explosion of joy, but soft tones of peace and self-care. I started dating new people, without fear, without rushing. And now, it wasn't about finding another love right away. It was about rediscovering the lightness of living without being trapped by trauma. It was about knowing I could talk, laugh, go out, and return home with a calm heart. I also started observing other women. I talked to friends, heard stories on social media, and read similar accounts. And the more I listened, the more I understood this didn't just happen to me. Betrayal, unfortunately, is a collective pain, a wound that many carry in silence. But it is also a source of strength. Because among these women, I found support, identification, and courage. One of the most memorable conversations I had was with a coworker who confided in me about being cheated on while pregnant with her second child. She told me I thought I was going to die. But one day, when my son smiled at me, I realized I couldn't let a man define who I was. That phrase stuck with me, not because I had children, but because it contained a universal truth. No one has the right to erase who we are. It was with this mindset that I began to rebuild not only my routine, but also my identity. That woman who had become lost in the midst of pain, who felt inferior, rejected, inadequate. She was gradually replaced by a new version, more aware, more empathetic, stronger. And it's strange to think about. But as much as betrayal was one of the most painful episodes of my life, it was also a turning point. It was what forced me to stop, to look at myself, to rescue myself. Because if it weren't for that, I might still be living on autopilot, slowly fading away for someone who never truly saw me. Today, every small achievement of mine is immensely valuable. Sleeping peacefully, waking up without anxiety, looking in the mirror and liking what I see, having plans that depend solely on me, knowing that the next time someone enters my life, it will be because I want it and not because I need to fill a void. And if one day he reappears, regretful or not, I already know what I'll say. Thank you. But today, I'm the one taking care of myself. Perfect. Below is the block 1 of part 10, with approximately 5,000 characters, keeping the narrative intimate, emotional, and with a strong connection with the audience. I thought that after everything I'd been through, I'd already overcome the worst pain, that no memory could hurt me more than the ones that had already crushed me. But sometimes what brings us down aren't the big events, but the little things. A scent in the air, a song playing on the radio, a silly memory of a happy day. And that's what caught me by surprise one random morning. I'd gone to the grocery store, as I do every week. I had my shopping list in hand, focused on restocking the household items when I passed the coffee aisle. And there it was. The same coffee I used to brew every Sunday morning, the one he said he only liked the way I made it. It froze me. Not because of the coffee itself, but because, for a second, I was transported back in time. I remembered us, laughing in the kitchen, the way he'd come up behind me, hug me as I stirred the sugar, and tell me it was the best moment of the weekend. That memory hit me like a rock, so gentle and so violent at the same time, because it made me miss something I now know was never true. And that's when I understood the pain that remains after betrayal isn't just the loss, it's also the illusion we had to abandon. How many things did I experience believing they were love, when in reality they were just distractions while he led a parallel life? How many moments I treasured as special, he might not even remember, too busy with lies or with her? This was one of the hardest parts of the entire process of overcoming grief. Understanding that not everything I experienced was real. That much of what I constructed was just in my head, sustained by empty words and rehearsed gestures. I returned home that day with a heavy heart, wondering if I would ever be able to trust again. Not just others, but myself. Because more than having been deceived by him, I felt betrayed by myself for not having seen it, for not having acted sooner, for having believed even though all the signs were there, right before my eyes. And in this sea of reflections, I also began to understand something that helped me heal another part of the wound. It wasn't my fault I didn't fail because I trusted. Trusting is beautiful. It's a courageous gesture. And it's not the one who believes who makes mistakes. It's the one who lies. It was hard to accept this because women are taught to blame themselves. To think that if a man cheated, it's because something was missing. That if he lied, it's because she wasn't good enough. But this is a cruel trap. Because when we fall into it, we start trying to fix what we didn't break. We start adjusting to the other person's mistake. And I refused to do that again. I'd already spent too much time trying to be the perfect woman for an imperfect man. I wasn't going to keep wasting energy molding myself to fit a story that wasn't even mine. There, sitting in my kitchen, looking at the cup of coffee I made just for myself, I made a promise. I will never abandon myself for anyone again. I will never again put another person's love above my own. I will never again allow neediness to blind me or the fear of loneliness to push me into the wrong arms. I'm not half, I'm whole. And whoever wants to be by my side will have to come whole too. Perfect. Here's the block 2 of part 10 with about 5,000 characters, maintaining an emotional, intimate, and deep tone. That same night, after the promise I made to myself, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and a notebook. On my lap, it was the same notebook where, months before, I had written pages and pages of pain, confusion, and sorrow. But this time, my words carried a different weight. I wrote with the certainty that I had returned to myself. There, between one sentence and another, I began to list everything I had learned, not from him. But despite him, I learned to listen to myself, to no longer silence my intuition. I learned that when something seems wrong, it probably is. That peace never goes hand in hand with constant doubt, and that love, when it's true, doesn't make us sick inside. I wrote about how hard it was to watch the world fall apart and still get up every day to fulfill commitments, smile at strangers, and feign normalcy, and how, deep down, it made me stronger. Because there's a quiet strength in women who keep going even when their hearts are broken, who wash their faces, don their invisible armor, and fight, even when everything inside them screams to give up. I also wrote about anger. Yes, because for a long time I was told that feeling angry wasn't right, that I should forgive, that I should be superior. But I learned that anger, when properly understood, is also a tool. It's a sign that something has deeply hurt us. And to ignore this would be to do violence to myself again. Feeling angry made me realize what I tolerated in the name of love. How much I diminished my desires, silenced my discomfort, accepted crumbs. All to maintain a relationship that was already rotting from within. But I didn't know it, or didn't want to see it. Now I see. And most importantly, now I act differently. Today, I no longer accept half-heartedness. I don't accept words without actions, promises without proof, presence without commitment. I've learned to observe actions, to listen to what silence reveals, to respect what my body feels when something isn't right. And the most powerful thing of all was discovering that I am capable of being self-sufficient. Not in the sense that I will never fall in love again or want someone by my side, but in the sense that if I ever do, it will be a choice, not a necessity. If a new love comes, let it come to add to me, not to erase me. Let it embrace me completely, without asking me to be less, to be more silent, to always give in. Because now I know whoever wants me will have to fit within the respect I have earned for myself. The most surprising thing about this entire journey is realizing that despite everything, I'm grateful. Not to him, never, but to the pain that pushed me inward, to the chaos that forced me to rebuild my structure, to the tears that watered the new woman who blossomed after the destruction. Today, I can say that the woman reborn after betrayal is much stronger, much more lucid, much more whole than the one who once believed in empty promises. And this woman no longer bows down. She chooses. She knows. She doesn't accept less than she deserves. And it was looking at the dark sky that night, embraced by the silence and my own words, that I understood. I won. Perfect. Below's the block. One of part 11, Outcome, with approximately 5,000 characters, bringing emotional intensity, closure, and reflection, all with the confessional and impactful tone you requested. For a long time, I thought my happy ending depended on someone else, that there would only be peace if he returned repentant, if he said it was all a mistake, if he apologized with tears in his eyes and told me he truly loved me. I dreamed about this, I confess. I imagined this scene so many times, as if his forgiveness were some kind of validation of the pain I felt. But today, I know I don't need that I don't need an apology to feel at peace, that I no longer depend on his actions to understand my worth, and that the validation I sought outside was always here within. I just didn't know how to listen. He never came back. He didn't apologize. He didn't reach out to me after everything. Maybe because he convinced himself he didn't do anything wrong. Or maybe because he knows deep down that he did, but doesn't have the courage to face it. That doesn't matter anymore. I don't need him to acknowledge what he did, because I do. I was there. I lived every minute of that pain. And the most surprising thing was realizing that even without this official closure, I was able to move on. I was able to heal. I was able to close the wound on my own. This made me understand that the end of a story doesn't have to be dramatic. To be definitive, sometimes the end is silence. It's absence. It's the void that remains, but which we learn to fill with our own presence. There were days when I wished he'd see everything he'd lost. That he'd see me strong, beautiful, at peace. That he'd regret seeing me truly smile again. But little by little, even that lost its meaning. Because true growth happens when we no longer want to prove anything to anyone. When we realize that the only person who needs to recognize our worth is ourselves, and I recognize it. I look in the mirror today and see a woman who didn't let herself be destroyed, who cried, yes, who fell apart, yes, but who rebuilt every little piece with dignity, courage, and self-love. The other day, I ran into a mutual friend who casually told me that he and the other girl were going through a rough patch, that they fought a lot, that she suspected things, that they were always needling each other in public. I just smiled. Not because I wish them ill. But because I finally understood that the problem was never me. He repeated the pattern. Because it's his problem. And it always has been. Meanwhile, I followed a different path, and I'm glad I did. Because if he hadn't cheated on me, I might never have awakened. I would never have freed myself from what I thought was love, but which was actually control, insecurity, and fear in disguise. Today, my heart is lighter, my soul cleaner. I learned to forgive not for him, but for myself. I learned to care for myself in a way no one ever taught me. I learned that freedom is the greatest gift we can give ourselves. And above all, I learned to choose with whom I share my energy, my time, my body, my story. I no longer accept tabs. I no longer accept doubts. I no longer accept loves that leave me confused. Perfect. Here's the block 2 of part 11, final outcome, with about 5,000 characters, bringing a strong, reflective, emotional conclusion with a CTA naturally integrated at the end of the narrative. You know, if someone asked me today what I would say to the woman I was at the beginning of all this, I think I would just hug her tight without saying anything. Because there are no words that explain what it's like to have your heart broken and still keep loving, breathing, believing. I would hug her and say silently, it will pass. You will survive. You will rebuild yourself. And one day you will be so proud of yourself for not giving up. The woman who began this story was insecure, anxious, and full of unanswered questions. She sacrificed herself to maintain a relationship that only she could sustain. She accepted emotional scraps, thinking that was the best she could have. But the woman who ends this story is different. And not because time healed everything, but because she made choices. Because she decided every day to climb out of the hole she'd been trapped in, and which for a long time she thought she deserved. I know the scars still remain. Sometimes on quieter nights, the memory returns. The bitter taste of doubt, the details of that early morning when everything came to light, her name escaping his lips like a final sentence. But today, when the memory comes, it doesn't overwhelm me. I look at it, acknowledge the pain, and let it go. Because today, I am no longer a hostage to what I lived. I am the author of what I am living now. I no longer need answers. I no longer seek justifications. I no longer want to know where he cheated on me, on what day, with what intention. These answers don't heal. They only feed wounds. What heals is what I decided to do next. What heals is being here today, whole. And if you who are listening to this now have also gone through or are going through something similar, I want to tell you something. You are not alone in this. pain that feels like it's going to swallow you whole. It will pass. And when it does, you'll discover a strength within yourself that you never imagined you had. Don't settle for less. Don't shrink to fit anywhere. You deserve more. You deserve love. You deserve respect. You deserve peace. But above all, you deserve to love yourself first and completely. This story didn't end the way I dreamed, but perhaps it ended exactly how it needed to, with the end of a sick cycle and the beginning of a new woman. A woman who no longer waits. To be chosen, she chooses. And she chooses herself first and foremost. Now I finally understand what freedom is. And no, it's not being single. It's being at peace. It's not having to look over my shoulder, not having to scroll through my phone, not having to beg for attention, not having to worry if the person I love is really where they said they would be. Freedom is sleeping with a clear head on my pillow. It's waking up knowing no one will lie to me in my own home. Freedom is being able to look back without shame, because I know I did everything with love, with truth, and that it was never my fault. And if you've made it this far, listening to every bit of this story, opening your heart to me as a friend, I thank you, truly, because telling all of this wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And if this story touched you in any way, if it made you reflect, remember something, or gave you the strength to leave a place where you no longer feel whole, then it fulfilled its purpose. Now tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven? Would you have insisted? Or would you have left sooner? Write your thoughts in the comments. I wanted to hear from you. I want us to continue this conversation, woman to woman. And if you like real, intense stories that talk about wounds, but also about healing, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and share this story with someone you know needs to hear it today. Because together we become stronger, and no one lets go of anyone else's hand.